In this video today, I'm going to sew together our Henley bodysuit. You can see here, and as the name suggests, it has the snap placket in the front, and then there's the added little chest pocket detail. So let's just get right into it, and we'll start by cutting out the fabric. So the type of fabric I'm going to use today is a jersey. It's like 95% cotton and 5% lycra. And that's a really good combination for the stretch and the comfort for the bodysuit. And it's also stretchy enough that I can cut out all of my ribbing pieces or my binding pieces from it as well. So that's an added bonus to having a jersey with enough lycra in it so you can match the binding to the main body perfectly. So I'm going to be cutting it all out of this fabric, which is from Magic Fabrics, and it's super soft, brushed, almost like a brushed jersey. It's going to be perfect for this bodysuit. So for our next step, you're just going to want to find your front piece, your front body piece, and cut down that center front area. It should be folded still just from cutting it. So you're just going to want to cut down that front center area, maybe 1.5 inches or 2, to open up the neck area a little bit, because you're going to sew the neckband on and you want that to be able to stretch. So next you just open your front bodysuit, and then find your back bodysuit right here, and we are going to match our shoulders, right sides of fabric together, and serge the shoulders together. So now that your shoulders are serged together, you can open your bodysuit up, and you can see the neck hole here, and you'll find your neckband piece. So this is my neckband, and you're just gonna fold that neckband so that the wrong sides are together, just like that, and pin it around the neck so that it's evenly distributed. So you can start at the 2 centers, and you're just going to match the raw edges together. Pin that in place. And then you can pin the opposite center. And then you just kind of stretch it to fit the neckband. You can pin it in a few more places. Just as long as it's mostly evenly distributed, because you don't want to do all of the stretching in one spot and then the rest of it's too relaxed. You just want to end up looking very nice that way. So once that's pinned in place, you are just going to serge it to the neck now. And you're going to serge it by pulling the neckband to fit the neck hole, just like this, and just working around from center to center. After you have your neckband serged on, we're just going to top stitch the same seam. So to top stitch it, I'm going to use a straight stitch on my sewing machine, and I'm just going to fold that serger seam down towards the inside and stitch right on top of it all the way around with a pretty long top stitch. So I'm going to use a stitch of like 4, and that's, I think, the widest stitch I have on my machine. Now that your neckband is top stitched, we're going to start with our placket pieces. So I have my iron set up here. I gotta find my plackets here, my 2 pieces. And I have my interfacing pieces here. And so you're just gonna take your interfacing and place it kind of on the top right section, so it's on only one side of the placket, and iron it in place. Now once that's ironed in place, you're going to fold your placket so the right sides are together like this. And you're just going to top stitch that, or you're just going to straight stitch that top portion at about 1/4 of an inch to close it. Now you will just trim those threads, and then you want to trim that seam allowance and trim the corner so there's no bulk on the top, because after you do that, then you're just going to turn it so the placket fabric is right side out now. And you can iron those in half just so they keep their shape a little better. And then we are going to place them on the front of the bodysuit. So pull your bodysuit over. And you're going to match both of the raw edges here along that center front line. And they should be touching one another when you line them up. So you're gonna make sure that they're lined up right alongside the neck edge as well, so that when you sew it, that they will end up perfectly even when you turn it out. So make sure that edge is lined up, and you can start pinning it in place. So pin there, at the other top. And you can take your guide, so this is your placket guide, place it down along the front, and then I will usually just place my pin down at the bottom of that guide so I know where to turn my seam. And you can just use this guide if you'd like by just pinning it in place here and stitching around it, or even using a pen, drawing a little line around it so you know exactly what line to stitch on. Otherwise, you can just use your presser foot as a guide, which is what I like to do. And you're gonna sew a straight stitch down at 3/8 of an inch, stop at that bottom pin, come to the other side, and then sew a straight stitch back up. After you've stitched down both of the plackets, then I'm just going to trim my threads. And I like to do this from the top, but you can also do it from the back. And you're just going to cut down that center line through the front of the bodysuit until you're about 1/2 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch from the end of that seam. Just snip through that. So once you're there, you're gonna trim into the corners of that seam. So you're gonna just trim right up to it, but not through it. And this is what it'll look like from the back. So you can see there's that little triangle down there at the end. So after that's done, all you have to do is fold your placket towards the inside, and it doesn't matter which side goes on top of which side. Maybe just whichever one looks better. Let's try this. I think that looks a little better. And then you can pin those two plackets together just to hold them in place. So now that you got the front of the placket looking how you want it to, you'll fold up that bottom edge, and then you'll see here the two plackets and that little triangle bit down at the end. So you're just gonna have to sew those together now. And you'll use a straight stitch, and you just sew back and forth about 3 or 4 times to lock stitch it. You can see here that they're all sewn together now from the front and the back. And you can just trim that bottom if you'd like to clean it up. And then from the top, now you just make sure there's no puckers or holes down at the bottom. And if it looks good, then you're ready to top stitch. So to top stitch, you're just going to use your straight stitch again, and you come down here, go across, back and forth a couple times, or you can even do a little bit of an X and then come back up. And now that your placket is top stitched, we are gonna be done with that for now. We'll set our snaps later. For the next step, we're gonna set our pocket, we're gonna sew our pocket onto the chest. So I have cut out my pocket placement guide on my front pattern piece, and I'm gonna set it on this side. But before I do that, I'm gonna hem my pocket. And to do that, all I'm gonna do is fold it, the top portion down about 3/4 of an inch, and just straight stitch it to hem. So after I hemmed the top of it, I'm just gonna iron the edges in now, about 1/4 of an inch on the remaining raw edges. Okay, now that my pocket edges are ironed in, I'm going to use this placement guide to place it in that general area. And then I will just pin it in place there. Now you'll just stitch the pocket on like any pocket with a straight stitch is how I do it. So I'll just start my straight stitch, lock stitch it, come down, and then lock stitch it to end. Now you have your pocket sewn on, and we're gonna move on to our remaining binding pieces. So you're gonna sew your binding on the same way you did your neckband, just by folding it wrong sides together and stretching it to fit the coordinating edge. So this is my front bottom hem. So I'm gonna just fold it like I did, stretch it, and then once I've done that, I'm gonna fold it in and then top stitch on top of that serged seam. So I'm going to go through and do my front bottom, my back bottom, and then my 2 sleeve hems. Now with all of your bindings serged on and top stitched, we're gonna move to placing our sleeves next. So here's your bodysuit. So you're just gonna wanna open it up to expose the armhole right here. And then you'll find your sleeve, and this is your sleeve cap here. And you're gonna flip that so that the sleeve cap and the bodysuit are right sides together. And then you're going to have a notch on that sleeve cap that you're just gonna pin to the shoulder seam on the bodysuit. So you'll pin that in place here, and then you're gonna serge this sleeve cap to the armhole. And you're just gonna need to manipulate it a little bit and start at one side, serge it on all the way to the other side. And you'll do that, and then you'll do the opposite sleeve just the same. After your sleeve caps are sewn on, it will look like this from the inside. And next you're going to fold the whole bodysuit in half so that your side seams line up. And then we're gonna serge our side seams closed. And what's really important for this step is to make sure your binding edges line up so that when you turn it out, those are even and it just looks a lot cleaner in the end. So you'll start from the sleeve and you'll serge down and end down at this bottom hem portion. Now your side seams are closed, and let's turn the bodysuit right side out. Now your final sewing step is going to be to secure these side seams. So with that serger tail left here, you're just gonna tuck it under that serger seam, fold the serger seam on top of it, and then do a little lock stitch on top, which means going back and forth. I usually go back and forth 4 times to secure it. And I'm gonna do the same thing for these 2 bottom ones and the 2 sleeve ones. Now we are done sewing and all we have left to do is set our snaps. So I have my snaps set out here. I'm just using an open ring metal snap and they're a size 14. And I'm gonna set them with my cam snap setter here. So I'm just gonna take my pins out. And I always set the bottom layer first with, you could call it the male half of the snap, because that just makes it a lot easier to line up the top portion and get a really accurate placement for me. So I'm gonna set that top one first, and you'll just put your open ring on the inside. Set that first half. And then I'm gonna set the bottom one, which will be about an inch up from the bottom. I just like the way that looks visually instead of it being too tight to the bottom. And then to find the middle, I'm just gonna match that top and the bottom together and pull them to find the exact center to put the middle snap on. Now that the bottom layer is set, you'll just pull that top half, put it on top, and then you can just easily feel for the placement of the top half. So that open middle ring will then go on the outside for this portion. And then move on to the bottom portion. So I like to have my back set over top of the front snaps, and so that means I will set this front ones first. So you'll just find your center to set the center one. Put the metal ring on the inside. And if your ribbing doesn't feel very stable, or if you're afraid it's gonna rip, you can either place a little strip of stabilizing fabric there, or you can place part of the snap on top of your seam area, and that gives it quite a bit of added stability. So with that center snap set, then you're gonna place your two side snaps about a half of an inch away from the center one. All right, so now that those are set, you're going to fold the back portion and just place it on top for the back snap placement. And there the snaps are done. And your last thing is going to be to either iron it or steam it. And then that is your Henley bodysuit complete.